Have you ever met one of those people who just can't be stopped? It's like they're unstoppable.
Yeah, I have.
Me too.
What's their mystique?
Nothing stops these people.
Don't stop.
Welcome to Mission Unstoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso. You're about to meet some of the most amazing people.
Stop. Don't stop.
They've accomplished their goals despite insurmountable odds. They beat adversity, physical hardship, and traumatic events, and emerged triumphantly. They're people just like you and me, and they're winners. Are you unstoppable? Here's Frankie to show you how.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Mission Unstoppable. I am your host, Frankie Picasso, and today we are going on a mission with somebody who is just brilliant. So hang on. Today we're going to trade in your city slicker brogues for cowboy boots and spurs as we hitch a ride along with H. Allen Day, author of The Horse Lover, A Cowboy's Quest to Save the Wild Mustangs. Now, Allen worked and owned a cattle operation on 200,000 acre ranch in Arizona called the Lazy Bee. And as well, he owned another in Nebraska when a realtor friend of his repeatedly pitched a property in South Dakota that had about 38,000 acres. Now, why would Allen need any more property? And what would he do with it if he did decide to purchase it? Well, now's the time to get on your pony and follow Allen down that footpath back in time on another Mission Unstoppable. Welcome to the show, Allen.
Well, thank you for having me.
It is really my pleasure. You know, I have to tell you that for the first 3/4 of the book, I fell in love with you. I contemplated ways to remove your wife. I told my husband, I love this man.
I hope it didn't totally fade.
No, I'm just kidding. I was really, you know what I was jealous of? The way you two make decisions.
Well,
in the book, Allen and his wife.
When things are right, it's easy to have two minds on one subject, so that's fun.
Yeah, well, no, it's really like how you guys got in the pickup truck, took a mattress, some wine, some steaks, slept out under the stars, you know, and discussed, among other things, what you should do with life. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. You, as I said, you had the Lazy Bee. You had 200,000 acres there, another, I don't know how many thousands in Nebraska, running a cattle operation when you were pitched this property in South Dakota. And, you know, how long did it take really for you to agree to go and see this property?
Well, I held back and told Joe no about 8 times, and I said, look, I already have 2 full-time jobs, one on each ranch, and they're 1,200 miles apart, and I'm wearing the wings off my airplane, going back and forth. Why in the world would I need another ranch?
And why did he keep coming to you?
Maybe I'm a sucker, and maybe he knew it. I don't know. What his pitch was, he said, Allen, when you see it, you know a good ranch, and when you see this, you will know what a good ranch it is. And boy, was he correct. I don't know about being correct about being smart, but I was hooked on the ranch. By the time I got to the headquarters, I was fully hooked.
Yeah, you said that when you arrived at the ranch for the first time, it was almost like a spiritual déjà vu that you knew this property in your heart somehow.
Yeah, it was like I had been there in another life, or it was all familiar to me. And when I stepped out of the pickup, it was like a heavy load went off my shoulders and just flew away. And it was like I was returning home from a long trip.
Isn't that funny?
I've never had that feeling before.
Wow. You know, I could just picture it as you described it, and it was so fun to kind of take this journey with you to this ranch and how everything happened. And with the Mustangs, you met Dayton. Where did you meet Dayton?
Well, Dayton actually looked me up. He had heard that I had a good rapport with the Bureau of Land Management, and he wanted to ask me to help him because the Bureau of Land Management manages all the wild horses. And so he needed an in. He needed a contact, and he said, well, they tell me you're the golden boy for the BLM, and I said, well, I don't feel very golden, but I do have some friends, and I do deal with the Bureau of Land Management.
Right. Now, it's interesting because, you know, I've always kind of seen them as the devil. But we're talking, how many years ago are we talking? This is in the 90s?
This is in the late 90s, yes.
Yeah, okay. So before they were even super evil.
Well, you know, as in every organization, there are some nice people, but they're just so bureaucratic, and then they have their quotient of not so nice people. But I do have some friends in the Bureau of Land Management and some friends that have retired from there. So they're not all bad, but as a bureaucracy, they're difficult to deal with.
Right. So you've always loved horses. Your first horse, was your first horse Little Joe? Was that your first horse? Or
my
Chico?
first horse was Chico, and Chico had been captured as a colt out of a wild horse group that ran not too far from Lazy B. And so when I was growing up, all the cowboys would talk about, well, you're riding a Mustang, you're riding a wild horse. So I just grew up with that mystique, you know, that wow.
Yes.
And Chico was such a good horse. Oh, my goodness, he was a good horse.
Now, tell the folks a story about being a dude. I thought that was so cute. You're 5 years old. You're going on your first, you know, wrangle.
The first roundup.
Yeah, the first roundup.
Well, you know, when you grow up on a ranch and we had radio you couldn't listen to and no television, well, you know, your world is what is right there. And so my world was ranching, was cowboying. And so little cowboys want to grow up to be big cowboys. So here I was 5 and thought I was 8. And so I begged my dad and said, you know, can I go on the roundup? Can I go on the roundup? And he used to get me really angry because he'd say, well, roundup is hard work, and it's not for old men and little boys. And I just, you know, I wanted to prove him wrong.
Right. And so you were 5 years old when you went?
Yeah.
Wow. That's young.
And so, and why, when he agreed for me to go on my first roundup, why he chose the longest, hardest day in the whole roundup. You know, we round up for 30 days, but there's always a hardest day, and that was the day he chose. And so, you know, the day started at about 3:30 in the morning when we got up for breakfast, and then rode up to where the 6 miles up to where we had the horses ready for work, and then the day didn't end till after dark. And so, you know, that's a big long day for a 5-year-old, I'll promise you.
No kidding. Yeah. Now, this ranch is in Arizona. Is that correct? What part of Arizona? In the hot part or the cold part?
We're in the medium. We're not up in the mountains, but we're not down on the hot desert, you know, like Yuma and Phoenix. Right. We're cooler than that, but Sonoran desert for sure. Okay.
All right. So you're out there, and they actually left you alone with a job to do on Chico. You had to, you know, round up. And
you would have thought my dad would have kept me close to him, but he didn't. He sent me with Jim and Ira, and he said, you make a hand and help Jim and Ira. So they started off to gather cattle, but the cattle were scattered pretty wide, so they got the little group going and got it down in a canyon. And they said, now, Alan, you follow this bunch of cows and don't let them turn back, and we're going to work the side hills. And we'll bring, you know, cattle into the bottom.
Right.
So, and they said, we'll meet you about a mile further down the canyon where Rock Tank Canyon ties in with the canyon that you're in. And we'll meet you down there in an hour or two. And it's a mile down the canyon. Well, a 5-year-old doesn't know how to tell time, so you don't know what an hour or two is.
Did you know what a mile was?
What's that?
Did you know what a mile was?
Well, and that's the other thing. You don't know what a mile is.
Right.
So, you know, what could I say but okay? And, of course, Chico knew what to do, so he got in behind the cattle and started following them. But as what happens with little children, are we there yet, Daddy? You said 10 minutes, isn't 10 minutes up, in 1 minute? And so same thing happened to me. I thought, wow, it had been several hours, and we must have gone 2 or 3 miles. When I hadn't, I was still, within the time limit and hadn't gone a mile yet. But how do you know that when you're a 5-year-old? So I got to thinking, and it started to get hot, and I was thirsty, and I didn't have any water, and
you wanted to go to the bathroom, but you couldn't get off.
I was afraid to stop and get off, and I thought the Cowboys had gone off and left me.
Yeah.
So I started crying, but I reached down, leaned forward, and hugged Chico, and he was my buddy. And Chico knew what to do, and Chico wasn't a bit worried, so he just kept following the cows, and I just kept hugging him. And finally I heard some cowboys shout off in the distance, driving cattle. And I thought, oh, I'm saved.
But I just love that the big worry was, you can't be a dude. You can't I would have cut my throat rather than have them call me a dude, So I had to make a hand, that was just, there was no other alternative. You've got to get out there and prove you're a hand. Right. Oh, I love that. Oh, so cute. And I love the relationship that you have with your horses and how you talk to them. I mean, it's the way I was. I grew up on a farm and I had horses and that's how I am with my animals. And I guess that's why, as I said, through the book, I cried a lot because I just remembered all those special moments I had and times with them. And it's really great.
Yeah. Well, I don't necessarily believe that horses know words, but I know for sure they know your tone. And if you speak lovingly to them, they respond to that.
Yeah, I think all animals are intuitive communicators.
Yes.
I do believe that. We're about to go to a break. And when we come back, we're going to continue to speak to Alan Day about the horse lover, his quest to save the wild Mustangs. It's really a truly inspiring and grandiose story. So don't go anywhere. We're coming right back.
Don't stop.
That's right. Don't stop listening. Mission Unstoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso will continue right after these messages.
Don't stop.
This is Uncommon Sense for Leaders, a forum for exploring leadership from the intellect, the heart, and the spirit. Whether you're a leader now or aspire to be a leader in the future, you owe it to yourself to learn about the big ideas that have shaped the careers of compelling communicators, masters of influence, and highly effective leaders. Uncommon Sense for Leaders. Tune in to hear thought-provoking ideas on every aspect of leadership. You can expect dynamic discussions with special guests, quick tips you can apply immediately for better results, and the tools you need to take you from where you are to where you want to be as a leader. Are you ready to crack the code for achieving unprecedented results? Then join the host for Uncommon Sense for Leaders, Catherine Carlisi, every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on the All Business Radio Network.
It's words you never heard.
Do you look like your spouse? According to a University of Michigan researcher, if you think you're starting to look like your spouse, you could be right. The study compared photos of couples in their 20s to pictures taken in their 50s and 60s and found the older they got, the more they looked alike. It's believed that couples have a tendency to mimic each other's expressions, which can produce similar laugh or frown lines around the eyes and mouth as they age, thus making them appear to look more like their spouse. It could also be that people use genoclexis when picking a mate. That's choosing on physical appearance. Maybe we want somebody that looks like us. However, also according to research, the more comfortable a couple is in their marriage, the less they look at each other.
It's words you never heard.
I'm Carolyn Davidson, and Words You Never Heard has been brought to you by the Bariatric Surgery Center of Dallas.
And we're back with H. Allen Day, and I'm your host, Frankie Picasso, and we are on Mission Unstoppable. So we have our little Alan, who was at 5 years old on Chico, and he's learning about horses and he's learning about ranching. And present day, in the 90s, he's about to purchase another piece of land, 38,000 acres of land, and his friend Dalton came to him with an idea. And tell us about that idea.
Well, Dayton got hold of me and he said, Alan, do you know what's happening with the wild horses? Well, I had a general overview, but not a lot of, I didn't have any hands-on knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, go ahead and tell me, Dayton. And Dayton said, well, that we have this nation's herd of wild horses scattered in 179 separate herds, but they overproduce. They produce too rapidly. And so if you do nothing, pretty soon there's so many of them that they eat all the grass and they do damage to the land and then they starve to death. So the Bureau of Land Management has to gather the excess horses periodically off there to just keep them from overpopulating everything. So he said, do you know what they do to these horses these excess horses that they've gathered? And I said, no. And he said, well, they put them in horse prison. They haul them 1,000 miles from where their native range is, and they put them in feedlots, and they don't starve them, but they're just in confinement there, and they break up their families and just put them in these pens, not to fatten up, not for slaughter, not for use, just warehousing them, just holding them there, I guess, until they die.
Which seems so senseless.
Well, it seems quite senseless, and it seems cruel to the animals. So Dayton said, we need to take those horses out of those feedlots and put them back on range and put them on the best range we can find. And lo and behold, I was just in the process of buying that beautiful ranch that had no cattle on it. No cattle, no livestock. And I got quite interested, and I said, my goodness, how many are there? And he said, well, that there was almost 2,000 of them, and that he had a small ranch where he could hold 300, but he said, I need room for, a place for 1,500 or 1,700 horses. And I said, well, guess what? I'm just in the process of purchasing that exact ranch.
Did the Bureau of Land Management, how did they come to own them? Just because they said they did? They didn't? Did they own the land that the horses ran on, or?
Yeah, especially in the 10 western states, mm-hmm. the government bought part of the 10 western states with the Louisiana Purchase, and then they bought California from Mexico and Spain, and then they bought the Gadsden Purchase. So the United States bought all these huge territories, and when they went to inventory what they bought, there were these Mustang, herds of free-roaming horses, right, in a lot of different spots out in those 10 western states, and those became our nation's population of Mustangs, of wild horses.
So they possess them by nature that they own the land.
Yeah, and some of those horses date all the way back to the conquistadors. When the Spanish conquistadors came across in the 1500s, they brought horses with them. And then some of those horses got lame or got away from them or, got left behind. And so they were the start of our wild horse herds. And then after that, when we settled the West, we settled the West with horses and buggies and wagons and what all. And then when trains and cars came along, we basically had 1 million horses that we rode and pulled our wagons and our stagecoaches and everything, and all of a sudden we didn't need them anymore. They were obsolete. Right. So people just turned them loose, and that became our wild horse herd.
And they're so interesting when you look at them because there's so many varieties. I mean, they're not just paints. They're not, the ponies that you see in the movies. It looks like there's buckskins and palominos and just like a wide variety of those priors and just so many different beautiful animals running around. It's gorgeous.
When we had our herd of 1,500 there in the South Dakota ranch, I always said that whoever you were, if you went out there and looked, you could find a twin to any horse you've ever seen or ever owned.
Right.
His twin will be in that bunch.
Wow.
So, we had big ones and little ones and ugly ones and pretty ones and, every color that horses come in. And, we really had a beautiful herd, but, very different.
So you guys came up with this plan to house the horses and allow the government to pay you for that privilege.
Well, the government was paying the feedlots $2.65 per head per day to house and feed the horses. Mm-hmm. And we went to the government and said, look, we'll turn them out on the very best grass, best prairie, best range they've ever been on, and we will do it for less than half what you're paying right now. So we will save you a lot of money, and the horses will be happy. They'll have smiles on their face, and they won't be in prison anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bureau of Land Management liked that idea, by the way. They said that's a good idea. So really what we did is we invented the wild horse sanctuary business, that industry. We were the first and only, and now there's quite a few. So, but we invented that industry, if you want to word it that way.
Well, this is what I don't understand. The Bureau of Land Management, the way I read it, I might be wrong. The Bureau of Land Management said, that's a great idea, Alan and Dayton, but you got to go to Congress now and sell it to them because they are the ones that have to prove it.
And that's exactly what happened. They liked the idea, but they didn't think they had the authority to contract with us. And, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But Dayton and I went back to Washington and wore out a whole set of boots walking the halls of Congress. And we probably should have hired lobbyists, but we didn't know that we should have hired them, so we just did it ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Which is good. That's good. And well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I think that the senators and the people there, they liked the idea that these horses were going to be well taken care of. They liked the idea that they were going to go to a place and to somebody who would love them and keep them well fed on a beautiful property because, it's history. It's history. These animals, these horses are part of, the West.
And we didn't have one single senator or representative turn us down. They unanimously said, we like your idea, and if you get some senator or a couple of senators to sponsor the bill, count on our support.
Right.
And so that's the way it happened.
So you went to a facility that had some wild horses, and you saw how they were operating.
Yeah.
And tell us about what you experienced that day. How did you feel?
Well, the
where were they?
Employees
were they in Nebraska or someplace?
Well,
where were they?
No, the one where I spent the most time was in Palomino Valley, and that's near Reno. It's north of Reno, Nevada.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And but the government employees they're not in love with the horses. They just have a 9-to-5 job, and they didn't seem to try to understand the horses or bond with them or communicate with them. They would just say, okay, horses, we're going to go from here to there, and if you don't like it, we don't care. This is what we're going to do. And so the horses would try to resist, and they'd run past them and turn over backwards in the alleys and the chutes and, try to run as far away from the people as they could. And so I had some experience before all this in training wild cattle to be gentle. When I got out of college and went back to Lazy B, my dad had been sick, and the cattle had gotten just really wild in the years that I was gone. And so kind of the way it works, in cowboy language, if you get wild cattle, the answer to that is get faster horses so you can run them faster
right.
or catch them.
Right.
But that's no good for the cattle. It terrifies the cattle and runs weight off of them, and, they get injured and all that. And so I thought about it, and I thought, no, I want to make friends with these cattle where I won't have to chase them and run them and, all the bad things. Mm-hmm. So I had invented a program to train the cattle to be gentle. And then when I saw how those people were treating the wild horses, I thought, wow, my cattle training program with a few modifications, I can make friends with those horses. Yeah. And I won't have to, they won't be terrified by me. They won't be afraid of me. They won't try to get away every time they see me. And so that's what I did when we got the horses. I made a training program and made friends with the horses, and they were quick to accept my friendship. And when they offered their friendship back, once a horse offers his friendship, he never takes it back from you. He's always true to that.
People who have never been around animals or cattle or, they probably don't know that there's as many personalities in the animal kingdom as there are in humankind. And, we're going to go to break in a minute. But when my dad first bought our farm, he gave me the first calf, and her name was Cocoa Puff after the cereal because she was chocolate. Good. Yeah. And, Coco would let me ride her. She would come when you called her. She was just, she was like a dog, really, yes. in a cow form. And they're just so sweet and they're so cute and they make really great pets. We're about to go to a break. Don't go away. We are going to come back with Alan. We're going to talk about the Wild Mustangs and everything in between. So stick around because you're not going to want to miss this. This is an incredible story and a good one and a sad one. And here we go.
Don't stop.
That's right. Don't stop listening. Mission Unstoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso will continue right after these messages.
Don't stop.
It's Marching and Herd.
This year's Super Bowl will air in 180 countries, and with that infamous coin toss, for one day, most people will toss out their New Year's resolutions to lose weight. The Super Bowl accounts for 7% of an entire year of chicken wing sales. 48 million Americans will opt for having food delivered, with pizza franchises seeing their sales double on game day. Domino's alone looks forward to selling over 11 million pizzas on Super Bowl Sunday. What's the word for food that contains unknown ingredients? Acampucky. Americans will eat over 100 million pounds of guacamole and 8 million pounds of tortilla chips on game day. What's the word for those folks who call in sick the morning after a little too much indulgence? Arfarfanoffs.
It's Marching and Herd.
I'm Carolyn Davidson, and you can have fun challenging your words you never heard vocabulary with my free app, Too Funny for Word.
It's Marching and Herd.
Yesterday, I called my computer helpline because I felt an overwhelming need to be made to feel ignorant by someone much younger than me. Hey, I know a few things about computers. The term reboot actually originates from the Middle Ages when horses who stopped mid-stride required a reboot to the hoof to start again. A timmy-nagy is another name for a device that saves you time and labor, such as a computer. Because my computer issue couldn't be resolved over the phone, they sent a Bobby Dazzler over to have a look. The technician informed me that it appeared my computer had been shaken or dropped, or as the Scottish say, misguggled. Whoops. Did I mention I have a bit of a temper when things aren't working right?
It's Marching and Herd.
I'm Carolyn Davidson, and Words You Never Heard has been brought to you by the Bariatric Surgery Center of Dallas.
And we're back. Thank you for sticking around. We're so glad that you did. The Mustangs are coming. The Mustangs are coming. So Alan decided that, he could probably figure out how to work with them a little bit better than those government workers were doing, who really didn't care about animals that much. And so they came 42 a truckload, and you had 1,500 arrive on the ranch.
Yeah.
Tell us about that first day. Christmas?
There's cosmic humor, I think, or I'm not sure what to call it, but the very first load that arrived the first day, my Cowboys were somewhere else because we weren't expecting the horses, and I was there. So the truck arrived and was ready to unload and leave and go get another load or whatever, and so we unloaded there are 3 pins in a truck, 3 separate little compartments, and
right.
So we unloaded the first compartment, and that was fine. They walked right off the truck, no problem, and the second one, no problem. And then the little compartment in the front of the truck up near the cab, those 14 horses said, "We're not getting off this truck. We're not going to move." And they wouldn't. And they formed a circle, and when the wild horses, when they're threatened, they'll form a circle, and they'll put their heads together and down in the center of the circle, and then all their rumps are on the outside. So if you try to approach them and get close, you'll get kicked.
Right.
And so there they were in that defensive circle, and they weren't going to get off the truck. So we had quite a time, and the driver was shouting at me saying, "Get those things unloaded, I have to leave." And I was saying, "Look, mister, I'm doing all I can." And the horses were not cooperating.
And a real testament to you and your love of animals is that he wanted to use the cattle prod. He wanted to shock them. And you're like, no, we got a better.
I have hot shots here in the truck. Let's get out the hot shots. And I said, no. This sanctuary is with love, not with cattle prods.
And if you don't know, for the listeners, these horses are run down with helicopters. That's how they're captured. So they just, their first entanglement with man is awful. They're just run to the ground with, just horrible.
The thing they're the most terrified from, because of the experiences they've had, is man.
Right.
Man is their worst enemy.
Absolutely.
We profess to love them, but we're the one that terrorizes them. So it's a sad state of affairs.
And I don't understand why people can't see that, going, gee, you know what? That looks terrifying to them, those helicopters and running them to the ground. I don't understand. There's just something missing in the mentality. But thank goodness you didn't want to use the hot shots, and you figured out a way to get those horses off and into their new home, which, they were happy with.
Well, it was a very humbling experience because the horses were just saying, "No, I don't want to be here, and I'm not getting off this truck." And I was there scratching my head and trying to figure it out. Finally got it figured out, and so it took us probably close to 2 hours to get the horses unloaded. But it was pretty funny. I think it was cosmic humor that I couldn't unload those horses. And what the follow-up is, that we got another 60 loads of horses out after that, and not one single horse ever refused to get off the truck. So it was just cosmic humor to give me a problem and make me get, on the very first day of the sanctuary, to give me a very humbling experience.
Now, the one thing that you talk about quite a bit is the smell. What is this smell that comes from these wild horses? How different is it from the domestic horses?
Well, it's similar, but with the wild horses, nobody ever grooms them, nobody ever washes them, nobody ever has their hands on them. So they've got, the only time they get washed is when they're standing out in a rainstorm. And secondly, they like when they go to water, when they move to a different piece of range or something, they like to gallop, not run, but just an easy, smooth gallop. So they exercise a lot and they sweat. so the wild horse smell is very pungent.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned to enjoy it. I mean, if the first time you smelled it, you'd probably think, oh, boy, that's awful. But it isn't. It's just what they are and who they are.
You know, my favorite scent, bar none, you're going to laugh, it's hay or clover with leather, like saddle leather, and horse manure. Like, just such a wonderful scent. You know, I don't know what it is. The three combined.
You're not alone in loving that smell, but believe me, most people smell that and want to walk away from it.
Yeah. It's just such good memories for me. Yeah, I love it. Interesting. So we have the horses, and they're a little smelly, and that's okay. And one of the things that you said that they didn't want was you to look at them. This was part of the behavior, that you don't look them in the eye. It's bad etiquette.
The wild animals, and I think wolves and, coyotes and other wild animals are the same. If you stare straight at them, that's a challenge.
Right.
And they are challenged, and they either want to come and fight, or else they back down and they feel they've been challenged. And so if you want to communicate with them and not threaten them, don't look at them directly. Look near where they are, but not right at them.
And so if you came forward as, beginning to enjoy their experience, there was Happy, who stayed on the outside, but he liked you, and a couple of others seemed to take to you. And there was a body language that happened with their mouth or something that told them, like, it was like, hey, how's it going?
Yes.
So what was that?
Well, when we would train them and speak nicely to them and not threaten them, mm-hmm. they would first not accept that, because man had been so cruel to them. They would run and try to get away. But
right.
if you did that repeatedly and were consistent with kind words and no threatening actions and no stare at them directly, sooner or later, then they would put one ear forward, one ear up, they would bob their head up and down, and they would do a chewing action with their mouth, but they wouldn't be chewing on anything.
Ah.
And that was their body language saying, I accept your friendship.
Right. And did you do anything back?
Well, yes, we would. With that friendship, I didn't do chewing with my mouth and what all, but I would move toward them in a non-challenging way and speak to them nicely and go about through them and about my business in a way that was non-threatening to them. So then they would say, okay, he's all right. He's an alpha male in our midst, and it's okay.
Yeah, you did incredible work with them, and you actually got them to follow your horses and go through, because you have a huge, huge ranch, and because of the management, the grass management, which you're an expert on, and you had to move them through different pastures and rotate this so that they wouldn't just, chew through everything at once. So you were very successful at being able to do that. And then the unthinkable happened. You found some dead horses.
Yes, and we were just building our numbers up, and we had 1,200 at the time, and some horses started dying. Not a lot, but maybe 2 a week would. Nice, good, fat, good-looking, healthy-looking horses would just lay down and die. And I got very alarmed, and, for a number of reasons. One is, what's wrong? I don't know. And number 2, I'm supposed to have them on the best range they've ever been on, and they're supposed to be healthy and happy, and some of them are dying, so it looks bad on me as a manager. Why are your horses dying?
Right.
So and when one would die, if you left them overnight, if you left the carcass overnight, the next morning it would just be white bones. The coyotes would come and just clean everything up that night. And
right.
So you couldn't leave them there and wait and do a postmortem later because there wasn't anything to check later. So I finally told my guys, I said, well, when one dies, stay right there with him. Call me on the radio, and I've got a vet lined up, and he'll come and we'll do a postmortem while there's still something there to postmortem.
Sure.
And so it worked that way, and he showed up, and he cut into him, and it only took him about 4 minutes, and he said, look here, this horse is full of worms, and those worms killed the horse.
And the horses were supposed to come dewormed from the BLM.
My contract with the Bureau of Land Management called for every horse to be wormed right before they shipped them to us, and they had not done that.
Right.
And I was awfully angry over that.
Well, yeah, because it's not just that they live in the horse, but now that goes into the ground with their poop and all of that, and you've got a never-ending cycle of worms on your hands.
Yes, we didn't have any worms in our world up there. You know, on the whole ranch, we didn't have to worm our horses or cattle or anything because there just were no worms in that world. And now we had worms, and I was terribly angry at the government for infecting my land with worms.
For sure.
And I still get angry when I think about that.
Well, it just shows another level of their mismanagement.
Yeah, so I called the Bureau of Land Management and said, boy, we have a disaster, and we have horses dying, and some of them full of worms, and we don't even know which ones have worms and which ones don't. We have no way to tell, so we have to worm all these horses. And we're going to do it next Tuesday, and we'll get it done on Tuesday. And so their response was, they said, oh, you can't do that. They said, first thing is we don't have the money to send for the worm medicine, and second thing, you can't do it in one day. You know, we've been in the business 20 years, and it would take us 5 days to worm those horses. And so I then responded and said, well, you're wrong on both counts. You know, you are going to pay for it, and I am furious about this. And secondly, we'll do it on Tuesday, and we'll be done by 2 o'clock because we've trained the horses. They respect us. They won't run backwards. They won't try to get away. They'll just walk down the chute, and we'll vaccinate them, and they walk out, and you know, it'll be an easy process. And it was.
And I can't believe we're about to go to another break. I mean, this is just going too fast. We're going to have to fast forward really quick if we want to get to the end of your story. Did Alan, was he successful? Was he successful at vaccinating these horses? You bet he was, because he trained them. And, you know, the BLM, they had no idea who they were up against. Just love it. Okay, stick around. We're going to break. Here we go.
Don't stop.
That's right. Don't stop listening. Mission Unstoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso will continue right after these messages.
Don't stop.
It's merging never heard.
February is National Chocolate Month. Historians say the Aztecs discovered chocolate 3,100 years ago, and it was revered to the point of worship. The word chocolate comes from the Aztec word chocolatl, which referred to the bitter, spicy drink the Aztecs made from the cacao beans. The first chocolate bar was invented in 1847 by Joseph Fry. Did you know that it takes 1 year for a cacao tree to produce enough pods to make 10 chocolate bars? The scientific name for the tree that chocolate comes from, Theobroma cacao, means food of the gods. Man cannot live by chocolate alone, but we women sure can. Personally, I could give up chocolate, but I'm not a quitter.
It's merging never heard.
I'm Carolyn Davidson, and you can have fun challenging your words you never heard vocabulary with my free app, Too Funny for Words.
It's the Fitness Minute with fitness expert Annette Hammond.
Yahoo Health describes exercise as physical activity that is planned, structured, and repetitive for the purpose of conditioning the body. The key words are planned, structured, and repetitive. You must have a plan. You have got to prepare a time to do it. It doesn't just happen. Effective exercise needs to be structured. You must prearrange what you will do during your workout time, and it needs to be repetitive. Exercising once or twice a week is not enough. It's better than nothing, but you need to make your exercise time consistent and recurring. I encourage you to do some form of exercise each day, whether it's cardiovascular conditioning, strength and resistance training, or flexibility. Make physical activity your priority. You can do it. I'm Annette Hammond. If you're a fan of Fitness Minute, like us on Facebook at Fitness Minute with Annette Hammond.
back. This is your host, Frankie Picasso. My guest today is H. Alan Day. He's the author of The Horse Lover, A Cowboy's Quest to Save the Wild Mustangs. And he is a real cowboy. You don't grow up on a 200,000-acre ranch and not be one. No way is this guy a dude. He's a real-life cowboy. And we're talking to him about the Mustangs that he has on his ranch in South Dakota that was that kind of loaned to him in a way, or that the BLM paid for to house on the sanctuary, on the Mustang sanctuary. And so after the vaccination, winters are a little harsh, and you had this hard winter in South Dakota, but then there was a real thaw day, and a number of the horses went through some water and drowned. And what's not clear to me is how the news got out to the news people so quickly, into the BLM, that these horses had died. Like, they knew before you did.
Well, yeah, it was New Year's Day, and the meadow where the horses were had a pond in the meadow, and the pond had frozen over maybe a foot thick, and the horses would walk back and forth across it, and it was just part of the meadow. And on New Year's Day, it warmed up and got, up to 50 degrees, or I don't know, but it warmed up.
Sure.
And the ice got soft, and a bunch of horses broke through the ice, and 14 head drowned. When they got in the ice, they couldn't get out, and some of the bigger horses kind of pawed them under. And anyway, it was just a disaster, and I just felt so bad about it. I never anticipated that.
Right.
I found out later that it happens in that world and has happened in the past, and I'm sure will happen again. Mm-hmm. Coming from Arizona, I didn't have that in my resume. I had never dealt with that.
But a neighbor had lost like 1,000 head of cattle or something that same way.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So, yeah, it did happen in that area. But it seemed like that was the beginning of the end, and the BLM came down on you, or somebody came down on you so hard, like they were going to put you in jail. They accused you of mismanagement, of hurting the animals, of not feeding the animals, of, starving them, and all this horrible stuff. And of course, you came, away unscathed because you had a veterinarian do autopsies on them, and he said, oh, there's a good layer of fat underneath their skin, there's hay on their stomach. These were healthy, happy horses who were, well fed. It was just a tragic accident.
Well, I found out later, I didn't know at the time, but I found out later that one of our neighbors was jealous that we got this sanctuary. He never bid on one, but he thought, gee, that sanctuary fell right in their lap, and there they are making a lot of money with a sanctuary, and I have to work hard for my living. And so when the horses fell through the ice, he was there, saw it, and he called the county attorney, and he said, I want to report a crime. These guys were mean to the horses, and they drowned these horses. And then the county attorney knew who I was and knew that my big sister was
Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, the justice in the Supreme Court. And he thought, well, boy, I'm going to land a big fish here. I'll grab this guy, and I'll make headlines by prosecuting the brother of Sandra Day O'Connor. So he was politically ambitious, I guess you'd say. So I immediately found out about it and went there and made an appointment with him and said, we had this disaster, and yes, I'm here. What can I do? Who says there's a crime, and what is the crime? I have a hard time understanding that horses breaking through ice is a criminal act.
Right.
What is that about? And his answer to me was, he said, well, we'll come for you with handcuffs when we decide what to charge you with.
Just so.
And I was just floored. I mean, yeah. I do not see myself as a criminal, and I didn't then, and I didn't know what to say. But I said, well, we'll cooperate any way you want. And he said, well, the first thing I want is to get these horses examined by a vet because, you know, he didn't say the neighbor, but he said, we have reports that you're starving them. And we weren't. We fed those horses 35 pounds of hay each every day.
I mean, this guy thinks that there's nothing easy about running a ranch. It's cold, it's hot, it's 24 hours, it's 7 days a week. It's hard, the hardest job you could ever do, really, I think. It really is.
It wasn't much fun when we went back out to the pond, and the pond had frozen over again, and we had to take chainsaws and chains and cables and have a tractor and cut out pieces of the ice and then reach down in the freezing water and get a chain around a leg or a head or something and drag those poor dead horses out of there. That wasn't much fun.
So I got to fast forward, folks, because we don't have that much longer. So what happens next is that you're asked to cull the herd. You're asked to cull the herd by half.
Yes.
That the BLM wants to take these horses back now. And you're suspecting that they want them the biggest. They ask for the biggest because they want to sell them for horse meat.
And that's exactly what happened.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, the people who really want to save them and are concerned about them just don't mind killing them for a bit of money. And then after that one happened, then they came back and they said, I want you to cull out the weakest and the oldest, and then they asked you to shoot them. Yep,
and that was the hardest thing I ever had to do while I had the sanctuary because they ordered me to murder 25 head, to euthanize 25 head of the horses, and I said, you know, my whole mission here is to love these horses and take care of them, and now you're telling me to kill them. And no, you know, that doesn't work.
And was there any reason for that?
Well,
they just didn't want to pay for old horses, or? They
were old horses, and it was in the fall, and when the old horses, 25 or 28 or 30 years old, when they usually die is when it's cold and you know their body shuts down and they don't put as much fat on and you know their digestion doesn't work as well, so we would lose, you know, maybe 25 of the oldest horses over a winter out of 1,500. That's if some died, that's when nature would take them.
Right. And what if you had said to them, it's okay, just don't pay me for them?
Well, you know, I probably should have done something like that. I had always lived up to my contract with the BLM and given them about 110% of what I contracted for because I was very proud of how the sanctuary was working and how everything worked just perfectly, and I just didn't think that I could cheat them that way.
Right.
That wasn't in my makeup. So,
but they don't mind cheating.
I didn't want any of my employees to have to do that ugly job, and so I decided if it has to happen, I'm the guy. The buck stops here. I'm the guy.
So
that
you had to do the unthinkable, and you did it. And then they decide in their infinite wisdom that you need to come and bid on your sanctuary, basically, on being able to do it again and keep the horses. And
I never did understand that.
Why aren't they happy?
I had this beautiful, happy sanctuary, and it was a success by any way you wanted to measure it. And then out of the blue, they said, oh, we're going to have to rebid this thing. And then they rigged the bid, and some people from Oklahoma underbid me by 1 penny.
Right. And it's not about money anymore. It's about something else, because you showed them that to move those horses and, you know, to revaccinate and do everything that they would need to do for those horses now, the 700 or whatever, to go to another ranch, that it would cost more than a penny each.
It would cost $80 a head to do all the blood testing and the vaccinating and the hauling and everything in order to save a penny.
They're just evil people.
To this day, I don't understand that. I mean, that's bureaucratic nonsense.
They're selling those horses today. They're selling them to the public. And I was just looking. They're selling them to the public. It's $125 for an untrained animal, $700 for a trained horse with a saddle, $200 for a halter trained horse, and $200 for a trained burro. And you know, they have to pre-approve you and do all of this stuff. But really, you know, they have the correctional facility training them now, the prisoners training these animals. And you know, that might be a good place for the BLM. But, you know, I do agree with, you know, prisoner programs training dogs and horses. I think it's great for them. But, you know, it's funny how, is it money or it's not money? Or, you know, there's just nothing that says we care about the welfare of the animals. And I know that in New Mexico, it's been a really big issue. Well,
It is an issue, and you know, in their defense, the horses in general breed so fast that we have this huge excess of horses every year, and they frankly don't know what to do with them.
Well,
so
that's what
one of the avenues is to train them and make them where they're useful to people, and then sell them, and they lose money on every one. I mean, it costs them $1,000 to train them with it, you know, that they sell for a lot less. But they're making an effort to try to get the horses to people that would like them and use them.
But you know,
so I give them some credit for that. But where they need to be working is they need to get the overpopulation down by administering some birth control to where we don't have this excess of horses that we have now.
But you say that there's no natural predators, but, you know, the wolves are able to take down a buffalo. Certainly they can take down an old horse.
Well,
I mean, they killed off all the wolves.
Some of the old ones, but there are so many horses and they breed so rapidly that we breed around between 20 and 25% excess horses every year.
Right. But their methods of birth control, we're going to lose you in a minute because we're almost at the end of our show. But I do know that their methods of birth control aren't very user-friendly or horse-friendly anyway. It's pretty
They haven't done enough of it, and they haven't done it well, and that's a fact.
I'm going to wish you the best. And if you want to go to your website, what is it quickly?
The Horse Lover, or there's also an Alan Day website, and either one, there's a nice video on there, and it's a nice, colorful website.
Thank you so very much for being my guest today. I really appreciated talking to you about the Horse Lover. I just think you're an amazing man.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate your generosity in having me on the show.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to Mission Unstoppable with Coach Frankie Picasso. See you next time, and always remember...
Don't stop.